In this video, I'm going to unpack a Japanese issue which has perplexed me and kept me up for actually decades now, which is that the front of a car in Japanese is called the bonnet, and the back of a car in Japanese, where you store things, is called the toranku. Now, if that doesn't make you scratch your head a bit, to explain, while both of these terms come from English, the term for the front of the car, bonnet, comes from bonnet, which is used in British English to refer to what I would call the hood. In contrast, toranku is clearly from American English's trunk, but in British English, where again bonnet comes from, that would be the boot. So how is it that in Japanese you have a British English front and an American English back of a car? Yes, in 2025, a lot of people know both sets of terms and maybe even move between them. I've heard trunk in Australia, for instance. But these terms are not recent and do not reflect any extant variety of English that actually exists. So for a long time, I just wondered, how did this happen? Did the first Japanese person to get a car get it from a British person? And they were like, oh yeah, what's that front thing called? And I was like, bonnet. And then they're like, okay, thanks. And they're like, oops, I forgot to ask about the back door. So they asked the first white person they saw, and that person happened to be American. Well, I've always wanted to know this, and now that I make videos for the unwashed masses of the internet, I have a motivation to, because we can all learn together. So let's explain why, as best I can. I'm actually not 100% sure, but I've done enough that I think I have a very convincing thesis. So, to start this video, sensibly, I went on the Japanese internet and did all the searching I could to find an answer to this question. And I found lots of Japanese websites noting that, hey, one of these is from American English and one's from British English, isn't that funny? I only found one that actually tried to answer this question, and they came up with two theories. I'll go with the second one because I think it deserves mention even though I'm pretty sure it's wrong. And that is the idea that Japanese people intentionally avoided calling the back of the car the butsu because it sounds like the Japanese word for boots, and that would be confusing. This is unlikely to me for a few reasons. One is that, same in English, but bonnet and boot are being used. But also, it's true in Japanese for the front of a car. Because bonnetto, to refer to the thing on your head, has existed in Japanese way before the invention of the car. The Nihongo Daijiten lists 1888 as the oldest source that it can find. And believe it or not, using Google Books, I was able to find a dictionary written by English speakers, but nevertheless a Japanese to English dictionary from 1869, which has bonnet and defines it as a thing women wear, using kaburu, so wear it on the head. It's vague, but it's not that vague. However, I could not find uses of bonnetto to refer to a car until around 1920. So the idea that butsu was avoided, because it were already referred to an extant clothing item in Japan, doesn't really track with this logic. And trunk is also confusing because, put the trunk in the trunk. That's something we can say in English and you can say in Japanese, and it's, a little confusing, but we all live with it. The person's first theory, though, is more interesting, and I think they're on the right track because they posit that what happened is the first cars that came to Japan had a bonnetto, but they did not have anything in the back to store things. And this seems to be kind of right, and I say kind of though because this isn't just true about the first cars that came to Japan, this is true about the first cars for decades. Ignorant little me, up until making this video, did not know this fact about the history of cars. I'm not really a car guy, public transit shika katan, but general history states that the first car came to Japan in 1989, and if you look at cars that were produced around the world in 1899 into the early 1900s, they don't have trunks. This car right here, for instance, is a 1903 Wilsely, but anyway, no trunk. And indeed, the first Japanese domestic cars include things like the Gorham and the Otomo, and these were produced between 1910 and 1930, and as you can see, they do not have trunks. Indeed, there are English sources stating that trunks as a thing on a car were not really normalized until the 1930s and 1940s. In contrast, where you can find Japanese sources referring to putting a trunk as in luggage into a car going back to 1915, the oldest use I can find using Google Books to refer to the trunk of a car is in 1900. Okay, so by the way, I should mention that if you're inspired by this video to go use Google Books to find the origins of words, how long they've been used, you need to be very, very careful because Google Books will just straight up lie to you. All of the books I have talked about so far, I have gone out and independently confirmed that they were published on the dates that Google Books says they are. But what you're looking at right now is said by Google Books to be published in 1900, and that is not possible because not only, again, were trunks not a thing in 1900, the magazine it's sourced from, according to other sources, came out in the 1950s. It refers to an 800cc engine, which I can't find the invention date of or the first production date of, but did not seem to exist back then. And it also notes a folding wheelchair, which apparently did not exist until the 1930s. So double check your data. I promise you that I did in this video. Anyway, the first actual use in Japanese that I can find using Google Books to refer to a trunk of a car, kuruma no toranku, come out in 1949 and 1947, and indeed you can confirm these even inherently in the text, as one of them notes something happening in June of 46, which clearly here is 1946. And the Nihongo Daijiten, which we talked about earlier for bonnet, backs this up as well, with their first recorded use of toranku to refer to something in a car, coming in 1957. So, while I should say this is not inherent proof, it does seem like my initial silly idea that Japanese people asked British people what the front of a car was called, but then randomly, for some reason, asked an American what the back of a car was called, is true. There's just like a 50-year-old gap between these two events. As mentioned, some of the first cars in Japan came from Europe, and on top of that, many early Japanese car manufacturers collaborated with British manufacturers, so it makes sense that British English would be an influence there. When cars started to have trunks, America was of course much more dominant in terms of like the automobile stage, and so it's quite likely that the first car that had a thing you could call a trunk or a boot on it came with a manual saying that, hey, this is the trunk. And now, because of this, we have the interesting phenomenon where Japanese people describe cars using words that come from English, but do not unite to reflect a extant variety of English. Then, of course, you have other peculiarities, such as kurakushon to refer to the horn, which comes from klaxon, which was a brand name and actually exists in some other languages apparently, but is now pretty much dead in the English-speaking world. And the winka, which is what they chose for the blinker, because I guess it winks. Which I suppose in a way does make Japanese cars quite international and tricky to learn all the vocabulary to describe, but you can of course avoid all this by just not using them and taking the train. Which is what I'm going to do now. Bye!